Monday mornings inside Harrison Global headquarters always felt like controlled chaos. The 48-story glass tower stood proudly over downtown Chicago, reflecting the golden sunrise across the city's skyline. Inside, more than 3,000 employees rushed through revolving doors, each carrying expensive laptops, takeaway coffees, and an endless list of meetings. For most of them, success had become routine. They barely noticed the people who kept the building running: the cleaners, the security guards, the maintenance workers, or the delivery drivers. At exactly 8:12 a.m., a small white delivery van quietly pulled into the underground loading area. It wasn't a luxury vehicle. Its paint had faded under years of hard work, and the company logo on its side had almost disappeared. The driver stepped out wearing a simple blue delivery uniform, worn black work boots, and a faded baseball cap that shaded most of his face. He looked like thousands of delivery drivers who visited office buildings every day. Invisible. He carefully lifted a stack of sealed document boxes onto a trolley and pushed them toward the main reception. No one paid him any attention. A young executive walked directly in front of the trolley while talking loudly on his phone, forcing the driver to stop suddenly. Without even looking up, the executive muttered, "Watch where you're going." Then he continued walking. The driver simply smiled. "I'm sorry, sir." He didn't sound angry. He sounded patient. A few seconds later, another employee rushed past, bumping into the trolley so hard that one of the document boxes crashed onto the marble floor. Hundreds of confidential folders scattered across the lobby. The employee glanced back, rolled his eyes, and kept walking. Not one person stopped. Dozens of expensive suits stepped around the papers as if they didn't exist. Some even frowned in annoyance, worried the mess might delay their morning. The delivery driver quietly knelt on the cold marble floor and began collecting the folders one by one. No complaints, no frustration, just quiet determination. Then, a pair of black heels stopped beside him. "So sorry." A gentle voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't have to pick all of this up by yourself." The driver slowly looked up. Standing before him was a young receptionist wearing a simple navy blazer with her company name badge. Sarah Mitchell, 26 years old, kind brown eyes. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, just a warm smile that felt completely genuine. Without asking who was responsible, without checking whether anyone was watching, she placed her own tablet on the reception desk, knelt beside the stranger, and began gathering the scattered folders. "I'm already late," she said with a small laugh, "but my manager can wait another minute." The driver watched her quietly. "You don't have to help," Sarah smiled. "My dad always says, how people treat strangers tells you everything about who they really are." For a brief moment, the delivery driver froze. Those words. He hadn't heard them in over 20 years. As Sarah handed him the final folder, she noticed his hands. They were rough from years of physical work, but something caught her attention. On his left wrist, beneath the sleeve of his worn delivery jacket, was an elegant Swiss watch worth more than most people's annual salary. Before she could say anything, the driver quickly pulled down his sleeve. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he smiled. Not the smile of a delivery driver grateful for help. It was the smile of a man who had just found exactly what he had been searching for. He pushed the trolley toward the service elevator. Halfway there, he stopped, reached into his pocket, opened a small black leather notebook, and wrote only 2 words. He closed the notebook, looked back at the busy lobby one last time, then whispered to himself, "The first test is over." No one in the building noticed. No one realized. The man they had ignored all morning owned every floor beneath their feet. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies over Chicago. Inside Harrison Global headquarters, the pace was even faster than the day before. Employees hurried between meetings. Executives carried expensive leather briefcases. Reception phones rang without pause. Everything looked perfectly organized, but hidden beneath the routine, someone was quietly watching. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the familiar white delivery van rolled into the loading bay once again. The same faded paint, the same worn work boots, the same blue delivery uniform, the same patient smile. The security guard at the entrance barely looked up. "Morning." The delivery driver smiled warmly. "Good morning." He signed the visitor log with slow, careful handwriting, a name no one recognized. The guard handed him a visitor badge without another glance. For everyone in the building, he was just another delivery driver, exactly as planned. Sarah noticed him the moment he entered the lobby. She smiled. "Good morning," the driver smiled back. "Looks like another busy day." She laughed softly. "When is it ever not?" Before he could answer, Linda Brooks appeared again. Her heels echoed sharply across the marble floor. She looked at the delivery trolley with visible irritation. "You're blocking the entrance." The driver immediately moved it aside. "My apologies." Linda didn't respond. She simply walked away, already checking emails on her phone. Sarah looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry about that." The driver shrugged. "Everyone carries burdens differently." His answer surprised her. Most people would have complained. He simply smiled and continued toward the elevators. On the 10th floor, the first test began. The driver stopped beside a large printer station where dozens of employees rushed past every minute. He placed a sealed document box on the floor. Then, as if by accident, he dropped an entire stack of important envelopes, white envelopes scattered across the polished floor. Several managers stepped around them without slowing down. One employee almost stepped directly on them. Another sighed loudly. "Can someone clean this up?" No one stopped. No one even asked if he needed help. The driver quietly bent down and began collecting them himself. His expression never changed. A young sales executive carrying a 2,000-pound briefcase looked directly at him. For a brief second, it seemed he might help. Instead, he shook his head. "If you're going to make a mess, at least clean it up faster." Several nearby employees laughed. The driver simply nodded. "You're right, I'll do my best." The sales executive walked away feeling satisfied. He never noticed the tiny security camera mounted above the hallway. 20 minutes later, the driver reached the marketing department. Outside the conference room sat an elderly maintenance worker trying to repair a broken vending machine. His toolbox had tipped over. Screws, wrenches, small parts, everything had rolled across the floor. Employees walked around him without saying a word. Some frowned because he was slowing traffic. One woman even complained, "Why do repairs always happen during office hours?" The old maintenance worker apologized quietly. "I'll be finished soon." No one answered. Then Sarah stepped out of the nearby lift carrying a folder. She immediately noticed the scattered tools. Without hesitation, she placed the folder on a nearby chair, knelt on the floor, and began helping the old man gather every screw and bolt. "You don't have to do this," the maintenance worker said. Sarah smiled. "My father fixes everything around our house. I've handed him enough tools to know which one is which." The old man chuckled. "You've just saved me 10 minutes. Then today's already a good day." The delivery driver watched from the end of the corridor, hidden behind a corner. Once again, he opened the small black leather notebook. Under Sarah's name, he added another line. "Respects every role." Then he looked toward the maintenance worker. The elderly man smiled at Sarah with genuine gratitude. The driver quietly whispered, "Exactly." Just before lunchtime, the final test of the morning began. The driver approached the executive floor carrying a heavy package marked. As he reached the reception area, he stopped, pressed one hand against his lower back, then leaned slightly against the wall. He looked tired. Very tired. A nearby executive glanced at him. "Are you waiting for someone?" "No, sir. I just need to catch my breath." The executive frowned. "You can't stand here. Clients use this corridor." The driver nodded politely. "I'll move." He lifted the heavy package again. His hands shook slightly. No one offered to help. No one. Except Sarah. She had come upstairs to deliver paperwork. The moment she saw him struggling, she walked over. "Here." She gently took one side of the package. "It'll be easier if we carry it together." The driver looked at her for a moment. "You've already helped me twice," Sarah smiled. "My dad always says, a person's job tells you how they earn a living. The way you treat people tells you who you are." For the second time, the driver became completely still. Those words, almost identical to something his own father had once told him. He slowly smiled. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Sarah's eyes softened. He just doesn't realize it." Together, they carried the package to its destination. As they walked away, a man standing behind the glass wall of a conference room watched the entire exchange. His name was Michael Reed, Senior Vice President, ambitious, brilliant, and convinced that kindness was a weakness. He watched Sarah helping the delivery driver, then smirked. "She's never going to get anywhere in business." He had no idea. The delivery driver had heard every word and quietly wrote one more name in his notebook, not under past, but under another page, titled simply, "By Wednesday morning." The mysterious delivery driver had become a familiar face inside Harrison Global headquarters. Employees no longer looked at him twice. Some barely acknowledged his existence. Others simply stepped around him as though he were another piece of office furniture, exactly what he wanted. The less people noticed him, the more honest they became. At 8:45 a.m., the white delivery van rolled into the loading bay once again. The driver climbed out carrying nothing more than a clipboard and two small document boxes. Security guard Frank smiled as he opened the gate. "Back again?" The driver laughed softly. "Looks like your company keeps me busy." Frank nodded. "They've got enough paperwork to bury a city." The driver chuckled. "I believe it." As Frank handed him another visitor badge, he quietly added, "By the way, my wife loved those flowers you sent after her surgery." The driver's expression softened. "I'm glad she's recovering." Frank looked confused. "I never told you she had surgery." The driver smiled. "You mentioned it last month." Frank blinked. "You remembered?" "People remember numbers," the driver replied. "I try to remember people." Frank watched him walk away. For reasons he couldn't explain, that simple sentence stayed with him. On the 18th floor, the first invisible test began. The driver stopped beside a coffee station. He reached into his pocket, then frowned. He quietly searched every pocket again. His wallet was missing. A nearby employee noticed. "Problem?" The driver looked embarrassed. I think I left my wallet in the van. I was hoping to buy a coffee. The employee shrugged. That's unfortunate. Then walked away carrying 2 expensive coffees. Another employee overheard the conversation. Without slowing down, he smiled sarcastically. I guess delivery drivers don't make enough for coffee. Several people laughed. The driver simply nodded politely. No worries. I'll manage. He walked toward the lift without another word. 5 minutes later, Sarah entered the same coffee area. She immediately noticed him sitting quietly near the window. You look tired. He smiled. It's been a long morning. She noticed the untouched coffee machine. Weren't you getting coffee? I forgot my wallet. Sarah didn't hesitate. She tapped her employee card against the machine. A fresh cup of hot coffee appeared. She handed it to him. There you go. The driver looked surprised. You don't even know me, Sarah smiled. I don't need to. It's just coffee. He reached into his pocket. I'll pay you tomorrow. She laughed. You don't owe me anything. He accepted the cup carefully. Thank you. No, she replied. Have a good day. Then she walked away before he could say another word. The driver watched her disappear into the corridor. For nearly 30 seconds. He didn't move. Finally, he opened the small black notebook. Under Sarah's name, he wrote, kindness without expectation. Then beneath it, he drew a small gold star, the first one, unknown to everyone in the building. Tiny cameras had already recorded every interaction, not security cameras, temporary cameras, installed only 3 days earlier, hidden inside smoke detectors, exit signs, decorative plants, every smile, every insult, every ignored request. Everything had been quietly documented, not for punishment, for truth. Meanwhile, on the 47th floor, the executive leadership team gathered for another strategy meeting. Michael Reed entered confidently. Tailored Italian suit, designer watch, perfect smile. He believed he was only months away from becoming chief executive officer. The current owner had hardly been seen in weeks. Rumors spread daily. Some believed he was retiring. Others whispered he was seriously ill. Michael had already begun imagining himself sitting in the chairman's office. He leaned back comfortably. Gentlemen, I think it's time this company entered a new era. Several executives nodded. We've spent too much money on employee welfare. Another director agreed. The scholarship program, the free family health care, the hardship fund. Michael smiled. Business isn't charity, it's profit. One older board member frowned. Those programs were created by Mr. Harrison himself. Michael shrugged. Then perhaps it's time someone modernized his thinking. No one noticed. A small maintenance camera quietly recording every word. Later that afternoon, the delivery driver arrived at the executive floor with another parcel. As he passed the conference room, the door suddenly opened. Michael Reed stepped outside. Without looking, he walked directly into the delivery trolley. One package slipped onto the carpet. Michael looked down with irritation. He didn't apologize. Instead, he looked directly at the driver. You people really are everywhere. The hallway became silent. Several employees looked uncomfortable. The driver bent down to pick up the package. I'm sorry, sir. Michael shook his head. No. You're in the wrong place. The service entrance is downstairs. You shouldn't be walking through executive corridors. The driver calmly lifted the package. My delivery requires a signature. Michael smirked. Then leave it with reception. I don't have time for this. He turned to walk away, then stopped. Without looking back, he added one final sentence. You know, if you worked harder, you might not still be delivering boxes. The hallway became completely silent. Even employees who usually laughed didn't this time, because something about the driver's expression had changed. Not anger, not embarrassment, disappointment, deep, quiet disappointment. A few seconds later, Sarah stepped out of the lift carrying financial reports. She had heard the final remark. She looked at Michael. Sir, I don't think that was fair. Michael turned slowly. Excuse me? He's just doing his job. Michael laughed. And you're defending him? Sarah nodded. Everyone deserves respect. Michael smiled coldly. That's exactly why you'll always stay at reception. Without another word, he walked away. Sarah looked at the delivery driver. I'm sorry. He smiled gently. You've apologized for other people's behavior 3 times this week. She looked embarrassed. I just don't like seeing people treated that way. The driver nodded slowly. I know. As Sarah disappeared into another office, he reached into his jacket, opened the notebook. Under Michael Reed's name, he drew a thick black line, then quietly whispered, Final test. Tomorrow. The executive floor was unusually quiet the next morning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago shimmered beneath a bright autumn sky. Inside Harrison Global, no one realized this would be the most important day in the company's history. At exactly 9 a.m., the familiar white delivery van entered the loading dock for the 4th consecutive day. The security guard smiled. Morning, David. The driver returned the smile. Morning, Frank. You look tired. I've got one last delivery. Frank laughed. Then hopefully they'll finally let you rest. The driver looked toward the towering glass headquarters. Oh, they're the ones being tested. Frank chuckled, thinking it was only a joke. Inside the lobby, Sarah was already helping a young mother who had arrived for a job interview. The woman looked nervous. Her 5-year-old daughter clung tightly to her hand. "I'm sorry," the mother whispered. "My babysitter canceled." Sarah smiled warmly. "That's okay." She knelt beside the little girl. "Would you like some hot chocolate while your mom has her interview?" The little girl nodded shyly. Sarah asked a colleague to bring a cup of hot chocolate and some biscuits. The mother's eyes filled with relief. "I don't know how to thank you." Sarah smiled. "Good luck. I hope you get the job." From across the lobby, the delivery driver quietly watched everything. He opened his notebook. Another sentence appeared beneath Sarah's name. A few minutes later, he pushed a large wooden crate toward the executive elevators. The crate was unusually heavy. A red label on the side read, as he reached the marble floor near the boardroom. One wheel on the trolley suddenly locked. The crate tilted sharply. It crashed onto the polished floor. The lid burst open. Hundreds of confidential files scattered across the executive corridor. Contracts, financial reports, legal documents, everything covered the floor. The sound echoed through the hallway. Boardroom doors opened. Executives stepped outside. Some frowned, others simply stared. Then Michael Reed appeared. He looked at the mess, then at the delivery driver. His face twisted with irritation. Unbelievable. The driver immediately knelt down. "I'm very sorry. I'll clean everything." Michael didn't move. Instead, he looked around at the watching employees, then laughed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly why important work should be left to professionals." Several executives laughed with him. The delivery driver remained silent, carefully gathering papers one by one. Michael stepped closer. His expensive Italian shoes stopped only inches from the scattered files. "You've been wandering around this building all week. I've seen you everywhere." The driver looked up politely. "I'm only delivering packages, sir." Michael folded his arms. "No, you're slowing everyone down. You delivery people always expect someone else to fix your mistakes." The hallway became completely silent. Dozens of employees watched. No one spoke, no one intervened, except Sarah. She had just stepped out of the nearby lift carrying meeting folders. The moment she saw the scattered documents, she immediately placed her folders on a nearby table. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the delivery driver. "Let's get these organized." Michael looked at her in disbelief. "Sarah." She didn't answer. She continued arranging the files alphabetically. Michael's voice grew colder. "I'm speaking to you." Sarah finally looked up. "He needs help." Michael laughed. "He made the mess," Sarah calmly replied, "and we're making it worse by standing here." A few employees looked at each other uncomfortably. Michael stepped closer. His voice echoed through the hallway. "Do you know why you'll never succeed here?" Sarah slowly stood. "No, sir. Because you waste your energy on people beneath your position." The hallway fell silent. Even the delivery driver stopped moving. Sarah looked directly into Michael's eyes, then quietly said, "My father drove a city bus for 38 years. My mother worked nights cleaning offices. They taught me something I'll never forget." Michael folded his arms. "Oh," Sarah smiled gently. "They told me, if someone's job makes you think they're beneath you, then your success has made you smaller, not bigger." No one said a word. One young intern quietly lowered his head. An elderly cleaner standing nearby smiled proudly. The delivery driver looked at Sarah, as though hearing exactly what he had hoped someone would say. Michael shook his head in disbelief. "You actually believe that?" Sarah nodded. "Yes." Michael laughed loudly, then looked around at the gathered executives. "Listen carefully." He pointed directly at the delivery driver. "This man will never influence this company. He'll never make a single important decision. He'll never sit in a boardroom, and he'll certainly never decide anyone's future." Several executives nodded. Some even smiled. The delivery driver quietly finished collecting the last document. He carefully placed every file back into the crate, then stood up. His calm blue eyes met Michael's. For the first time all week, he didn't apologize. Instead, he simply asked one question. "Are you certain?" Michael smirked. "Absolutely." The driver smiled, not angrily, not proudly, just knowingly. "I appreciate your honesty." Michael frowned. "What does that mean?" The driver adjusted the sleeve of his worn blue jacket, looked around the hallway, then answered softly, "It means I've seen everything I needed to see." Without another word, he picked up the crate, turned around, and calmly walked toward the private executive lift. Michael laughed again. "Wrong lift. Service elevators downstairs." But something strange happened. The private lift, reserved only for board members and the company owner, opened automatically. No keycard, no security code. The delivery driver stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he looked back at everyone gathered in the hallway, especially Sarah. He gave her a small nod, almost a gesture of gratitude. Then the lift doors quietly closed. The hallway remained silent. Michael forced a laugh. He must have slipped in before security noticed. Nobody answered because every employee had noticed something. The private executive lift could only be accessed by one person. Every conference room inside Harrison Global fell silent. An urgent company-wide email had emptied offices across the building. Managers, executives, department heads, everyone had been instructed to report to the executive boardroom immediately. Rumors spread through every hallway. Did someone leak confidential information? Is the company being sold? Has Mr. Harrison finally returned? No one knew. Only one chair remained empty. The chairman's chair, the seat no one had occupied in almost 3 months. Michael Reed adjusted his tailored navy suit in the reflection of the boardroom window. He looked confident. In fact, he felt excited. This meeting could finally be the moment he'd been waiting for. He whispered to the vice president beside him, "If Harrison announces retirement today, I'm ready." The vice president smiled. "I think everyone knows you'll be the next CEO." Michael nodded confidently. "I've practically been running this company already." Across the room, Sarah quietly entered and took a seat near the back. Receptionists were rarely invited to executive meetings. She felt completely out of place. Linda Brooks leaned over and whispered, "I have no idea why you're here." Sarah simply smiled politely. "Neither do I." 2 o'clock came. Nothing happened. 2:02. Still nothing. The room grew restless. People checked their watches. Some sighed impatiently. Then, the massive boardroom doors slowly opened. Everyone turned toward the entrance. The room immediately filled with whispers. It was the delivery driver, still wearing the same faded blue uniform, still carrying the same worn leather notebook. Michael frowned. "What is he doing here?" A director stood up. "Excuse me. This meeting is restricted. I think you're lost." The delivery driver smiled politely. "I don't believe I am." Several executives laughed quietly. One whispered, "Security really needs to do a better job." Michael stood. "I'm afraid this room is reserved for senior leadership. You'll need to leave." The driver calmly walked forward, not hurried, not nervous, just confident. Every step echoed across the polished wooden floor. He stopped beside the chairman's chair. Michael pointed toward the door. "You heard me?" The driver looked at him. "I did." "And?" Michael asked. The driver quietly removed his faded baseball cap. Then, he slowly unzipped the old blue delivery jacket. The room became silent. Beneath it, he was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Then, he removed a pair of simple work gloves, straightened his tie, and placed the worn delivery jacket neatly over the back of the chairman's chair. No one spoke, no one even breathed. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened once more. Every member of the board of directors entered together. Without saying a single word, they walked directly toward the delivery driver. Then, one by one, they stopped, lowered their heads respectfully, and the oldest director spoke. The room froze. Michael blinked. Someone nervously laughed. "No, that's impossible." The delivery driver slowly turned toward the room. His calm blue eyes scanned every face. Finally, he spoke. "My name is David Harrison, founder, chairman, and owner of Harrison Global." Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed impossible to understand. Sarah stared at him. The kind delivery driver, the man she'd bought coffee for, owned the entire company. Michael shook his head. This has to be some kind of joke." David calmly reached into his pocket. He removed a black access card, platinum, unlike the blue employee cards everyone else carried. He placed it against the chairman's desk. A green light flashed. The large screen behind him immediately came to life. It displayed one message. Then another screen appeared. Company records, ownership documents, his official photograph. His digital signature. There was no mistake. The delivery driver was the billionaire owner. The color drained from Michael's face. He remembered every word he'd spoken. "You'll never influence this company. You'll never sit in a boardroom. You'll never decide anyone's future." Each sentence echoed inside his mind. David looked at him calmly. "No, Mr. Reed, I won't repeat your words, because everyone in this room already remembers them." Michael lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. David slowly picked up the worn black leather notebook. "This week, I didn't come here to inspect financial reports. I didn't review profits. I didn't examine sales figures." He looked around the room. "I came to measure something far more valuable." He opened the notebook. Character. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. David continued, "A company can survive poor sales. It can recover from bad investments, but it cannot survive when its people forget how to treat other human beings." His voice remained calm, but every word landed like a hammer. He looked toward Sarah. She immediately lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the attention. David smiled warmly. "Miss Sarah Mitchell." She slowly stood. "Yes, sir? For 4 days? You believed I was simply a delivery driver, yet you helped me every single time. You never asked my name. You never asked my position. You simply saw another human being who needed kindness." Sarah smiled nervously. "I was only doing what anyone should do." David shook his head gently. "No, you were doing what very few people actually did." The room fell silent once again. David closed the notebook, then looked back at the executives. What you're about to see will determine the future of this company. He picked up a small remote control. The lights dimmed. Behind him, the giant screen changed. A video file appeared. Its title read, Michael's heart sank. Every hidden camera, every conversation, every insult, every act of kindness was about to be revealed. The boardroom lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the giant screen flickered to life. Every executive, every manager, every department head, every employee invited to the meeting, all eyes were fixed on the screen. David Harrison stood silently beside it. No anger, no triumph, only quiet disappointment. He pressed the remote. The first video began. The footage showed Monday morning, the marble lobby, the delivery trolley, the box falling to the floor, hundreds of documents scattered everywhere. The room watched in complete silence. One executive after another walked past without stopping. Some stepped over the papers. Others looked away. Then came the young executive who muttered, "Watch where you're going." The camera captured everything. His face, his voice, his expression. The executive slowly lowered his head. He couldn't even look at the screen. The second clip began. The 10th floor printer station. The delivery driver accidentally dropping a stack of envelopes. Again, employees ignored him. One man laughed, another complained. Someone whispered, "Not my problem." David paused the video, then turned toward the room. "Tell me something." No one answered. "If these envelopes had belonged to your chief executive officer, would anyone have helped?" Silence. David nodded slowly. "Exactly. You weren't responding to a person. You were responding to a title." He played another clip. The break room. Sarah quietly placing her lunch in front of the young intern who had forgotten his wallet. The intern looked overwhelmed with gratitude. David stopped the recording. "Did anyone tell Miss Mitchell to do this?" "No, sir," someone answered quietly. "Was she trying to impress anyone?" Another voice replied, "No." David smiled. "Character is what you do when there's nothing to gain." Another video appeared. The elderly maintenance worker. Tools scattered across the floor. Employees walking around him, some visibly annoyed. Then Sarah kneeling beside him, helping gather every screw, every wrench, every bolt. The maintenance worker smiled through tears. The room remained silent. David looked around. "How many of you know his name?" No one answered. He looked toward the back of the room. The elderly maintenance worker slowly stood. David smiled warmly. "This is George Wilson. He has repaired this building for 22 years. George looked overwhelmed. David continued, "Some of you pass him every day, but today is the first time you've actually seen him." Several executives looked ashamed. George quietly wiped away a tear. David pressed the remote again. Another recording appeared. The executive hallway, the heavy crate falling, documents covering the floor. Then Michael Reed entered the screen. Every word he had spoken echoed through the boardroom. "This is exactly why important work should be left to professionals. You people are everywhere. If you worked harder, you might not still be delivering boxes." No one moved, no one breathed. The recording continued, Sarah stepping forward, defending the delivery driver, helping gather the files. Then came the sentence that silenced the entire room. "My father drove a city bus for 38 years. My mother cleaned offices. If someone's job makes you think they're beneath you, then your success has made you smaller, not bigger." When the video ended, the room remained completely still. Michael stared at the polished table in front of him. His confidence had vanished. For the first time in his career, he had nowhere to hide. David slowly walked toward him. "Mr. Reed," Michael stood. I'd like to apologize." David nodded politely. "I believe you." Michael looked relieved. Then David continued, "But tell me, who are you apologizing to?" Michael frowned. "I don't understand." David looked directly into his eyes. "Are you apologizing because you hurt another human being, or because you just discovered who that human being was?" The question hit harder than any accusation. Michael opened his mouth. No words came out, because he knew. The answer wasn't one he wanted to admit. David turned away. "This week, I wasn't looking for perfect employees. I was looking for honest hearts." He slowly walked across the room. "When I founded Harrison Global 35 years ago, I owned one van." He smiled softly. "I made deliveries myself. I loaded boxes. I cleaned warehouses. I answered customer complaints." He paused. "No job is beneath anyone. The only thing beneath a person is believing someone else's work has less dignity than your own." The room erupted into quiet applause. Not because anyone had been told to clap, because every word felt true. David walked back toward the chairman's chair. He looked at Sarah. "Miss Mitchell." She stood nervously. "Sir, I have one question." She nodded. "When you helped me, did you think I might reward you?" Sarah smiled gently. "No." "Why not?" "Because kindness isn't supposed to be an investment. It's supposed to be a habit." For the first time that afternoon, David Harrison laughed. A genuine laugh. Then he looked toward the board of directors. "I've heard enough." One director stood. "So have we." The chairman of the governance committee slowly rose to his feet. "In 30 years, I've never seen a more qualified leader. The room looked confused. The director smiled. I'm not talking about business. I'm talking about character. David looked at Sarah, then quietly said, Miss Mitchell, I'd like to offer you a new position. Sarah blinked. I don't understand. David smiled. You will. But first, he turned toward Michael Reed, and there is one final decision I need to make. Michael's face turned pale. The room fell silent. No one knew what David was about to do. The boardroom remained silent. Every eye was fixed on David Harrison. No one dared to speak, not after everything they had just witnessed. David slowly walked toward Michael Reed. The senior executive stood motionless. His confidence, his pride, everything that had defined him only an hour earlier had disappeared. David stopped a few feet away. Mr. Reed, Michael swallowed hard. Yes, sir. David's voice remained calm. I've spent 35 years building this company, not just its profits, its reputation, its values. He paused. And in less than 4 days, you reminded me how quickly those values can disappear. Michael lowered his head. I was wrong. I know. David nodded gently. But this isn't about making mistakes. It's about refusing to learn from them. Michael took a deep breath. I'll change. I promise. David looked into his eyes. I hope you do. Because today's decision isn't punishment. It's responsibility. The room remained completely still. David turned toward the board of directors. As of this moment, Michael Reed is relieved of all executive responsibilities. A quiet gasp spread across the room. Michael closed his eyes. He had expected it. Yet hearing the words still felt unbearable. David continued, Your employment with Harrison Global ends today. Michael looked up. There was no anger in David's face, only sadness. David walked closer. I don't believe you're an evil man. I believe you forgot something, Michael whispered. What? David answered softly. That every title you hold belongs to someone else before you, and one day it will belong to someone else after you. But your character, that is the only position you keep forever. Michael's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking about his career. He was thinking about the people he had hurt. Without another word, he quietly removed his company identification badge, placed it on the conference table, nodded respectfully, and walked toward the exit before leaving. He stopped beside George, the elderly maintenance worker. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Michael extended his hand. I'm sorry. George looked surprised, then slowly shook it. I hope you mean that. I do, Michael replied quietly. Then he walked away. The boardroom doors closed behind him. No one celebrated, because everyone understood. The biggest loss wasn't his job. It was the years he had spent believing respect had to be earned through status. David took a slow breath, then turned toward Sarah. She looked completely overwhelmed. Miss Mitchell, she stood nervously. Yes, Mr. Harrison? David smiled. Do you know why I asked you to attend today's meeting? She shook her head. No, sir, because for 4 days, you reminded me why I built this company. Sarah looked down. I only tried to help. No, David replied. You did much more than that. He walked toward the large screen. Another photograph appeared. It showed Harrison Global's very first office, a tiny rented warehouse, 1 delivery van, 3 employees. David smiled at the old picture. When I started this company, my mother gave me one piece of advice. He looked around the room. She said, Son, if your business ever becomes too important to carry 1 box, it has become too small to carry people's trust. The room remained silent. David continued, I've tried to live by those words every day. He smiled at Sarah, and this week, I discovered someone else already does. David reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a small blue envelope. On the front was written one name. He handed it to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal appointment letter. She stared at it in disbelief. There must be some mistake. David smiled. There isn't. She looked at the title again. Her voice barely worked. The room erupted into whispers. One executive looked astonished. A receptionist? David turned toward him. No. He smiled. A leader. The executive immediately fell silent. Sarah looked completely overwhelmed. I've never managed people. David nodded. I know. I've never led a department. I know. I don't even have an MBA. David smiled warmly. Neither did I. A few directors laughed quietly. David continued, I can teach someone how to read financial reports. I can teach strategy. I can teach negotiation. But I cannot teach someone to genuinely care about another human being. He looked around the room. That either lives inside a person or it doesn't. David slowly walked back to the chairman's chair. I've spent years promoting people because they were brilliant. He smiled sadly. Today, I'm promoting someone because she's good. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say, David answered gently. Then don't. Just promise me something. She nodded. Anything. When people walk into this building, I don't want them remembering the glass walls, the expensive furniture, the company logo. He paused. I want them remembering how they were treated. Sarah smiled through tears. I promise. David looked toward the board of directors. I'd also like to announce something else. He pressed the remote. The screen changed again. A new initiative appeared. Employees looked at one another. David explained, beginning today, performance reviews will include something we've never measured before. Not only what you achieve, but how you help others achieve. The room broke into applause. Even the most senior executives stood to their feet, not because they had to, because they believed it. As the applause settled, David looked toward the back of the room. George, the elderly maintenance worker, looked surprised. Sir? David smiled. I've been meaning to thank you. George looked confused. For what? David laughed softly. For keeping my first warehouse running 35 years ago. George's eyes widened. You remember that? David smiled. I remember everyone who helped build this company. George wiped away tears. I never thought you'd remember someone like me. David walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. I never forgot, and I never will. The room watched in silence. At that moment, every employee understood what true leadership looked like, just as everyone thought the meeting was over. David looked back at Sarah. There is one final surprise. Sarah laughed nervously. I don't think my heart can handle another one, David smiled. I think it can. He reached for another envelope. This one was sealed with the Harrison Global emblem. What I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with your promotion. It has everything to do with your father. Sarah's smile slowly disappeared. My father? David nodded. Yes. And suddenly, the room became silent once again. The boardroom had grown completely silent. Moments earlier, everyone had been applauding Sarah's promotion. Now, every eye was on David Harrison. He held a second envelope in his hands. Unlike the first one, this envelope wasn't addressed to an employee. It simply read, "For the Mitchell family." David looked at Sarah with a gentle smile. You've spent the last 4 years taking care of someone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. My father. David nodded. Yes. She looked confused. How? Do you know about him? David walked closer. When someone is being considered for leadership, I don't just study their work, I study their sacrifices. Sarah lowered her eyes. She had never spoken about her father inside the company. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want special treatment. She simply wanted to do her job. David continued, I learned that every Thursday morning before coming to work, you drive your father to the free community clinic. Sarah stared at him. I also learned that you canceled your own holiday, sold your mother's jewelry, and worked overtime for nearly 2 years, just to pay his medical bills. The room fell completely silent. No one had known. Not Linda, not the executives, not even Sarah's closest colleagues. David smiled gently. You never told anyone, Sarah whispered, because they weren't my burden to share. David slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single document. He handed it to Sarah. She looked down. Her hands began to shake. Across the top, it read, below it. One sentence changed her life forever. All medical expenses for Mr. Robert Mitchell will be fully covered. Specialist treatment, medication, physical therapy, home nursing care, every appointment, every prescription, every operation, paid in full, for as long as he needed. Sarah stared at the page, unable to breathe. This can't be real. David smiled warmly. It is. She looked up. But why? David answered softly. Because companies should invest in people, not only in buildings. Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. I don't know how to thank you. David shook his head. You already have. She looked confused. When? He smiled. The moment you helped a tired delivery driver, without expecting anything in return. The room remained perfectly still. Even the board of directors looked emotional. David turned toward everyone. I want every person here to understand something. He slowly removed the old blue delivery jacket from the back of the chairman's chair. He held it up. For 4 days. This jacket protected me. It hid my title, it hid my wealth, it hid my influence. He paused, but it revealed something far more important. He looked around the room. It revealed yours. No one moved, no one spoke, because every employee understood exactly what he meant. David walked toward the front windows overlooking Chicago. When I was 23 years old, I delivered parcels in this city. Some people smiled, some ignored me, some treated me like I was invisible. He smiled softly. I promised myself something. If I ever built a successful company, no one would ever be judged by the uniform they wore. He turned back toward the room. And yet, this week, I discovered we still had work to do. He looked directly at every employee. From today onward, Harrison Global will have one new rule. The large screen behind him lit up. In bold letters appeared, David continued, if anyone asks what our greatest company policy is, don't tell them about profits. Don't tell them about innovation. Tell them this, he smiled. The way we treat the person who opens the door should be exactly the same as the way we treat the person who owns the building. The room erupted into applause. This time, no one held back. People stood, some wiped away tears. Others looked at colleagues they had ignored for years. A few quietly walked over to shake hands with cleaners, receptionists, and maintenance staff who had been invited to the meeting. It wasn't because David was watching, it was because they finally understood. 1 week later, Harrison Global looked different. Not because the building had changed, because the people had. Executives now greeted security guards by name. Managers ate lunch with interns. Receptionists were invited to leadership meetings. Maintenance staff were publicly recognized every month. The atmosphere inside the company felt warmer, more human, and strangely, profits increased. Employee satisfaction reached the highest level in the company's history. Staff turnover dropped dramatically. Clients noticed the difference, because kindness, like disrespect, has a way of spreading. 3 months later, Sarah stood in her new office. It wasn't the biggest office in the building. She had asked for something different. Its door remained open. Always. On one wall hung a framed photograph, not of David Harrison, not of the company headquarters, but of her father, standing proudly beside the old city bus he had driven for 38 years. Below the photograph was a small brass plaque. It carried the words he had taught her as a little girl: treat every person with dignity. Titles disappear. Character remains. Every morning, before beginning work, Sarah read those words. They reminded her that leadership was never about authority. It was about responsibility. That afternoon, a young delivery driver arrived with a parcel. He looked nervous. It was his first week on the job. Before he could apologize for arriving late, Sarah walked over, smiled, and offered him a cup of coffee. The young man looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." Sarah smiled. "I know." As he left, David Harrison happened to walk through the lobby. He watched the moment quietly, then smiled to himself. The lesson had been passed on, not through speeches, not through rules, but through one simple act of kindness. People often believe success is measured by the office you occupy, the title on your business card, or the size of your bank account. But none of those things reveal who you truly are. Your character is revealed by something much smaller: how you treat the person who has nothing to offer you. Because one day, the stranger you ignore, the cleaner you overlook, or the delivery driver you underestimate may not change your career, but the way you treated them will always reveal who you were. The greatest leaders are never remembered for the power they held. They are remembered for the people they lifted.